In 2005, survival horror stood at a crossroads. For years, the genre had been defined by claustrophobic hallways, static camera angles, and enemies that lurched towards you like sleepwalkers. Games like Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 3 were masterclasses in atmosphere, but their deliberate pacing and restrictive mechanics were starting to feel old. Players craved something faster, more visceral, something that didn't just unsettle them, it terrified them. Enter the PlayStation 2 era. Action games like Devil May Cry were redefining player expectations with slick combos and fluid movement. Meanwhile, Resident Evil's developers faced an identity crisis. Their last major entry, 2002's remake of the original Resident Evil that released in 1996, was a critical darling but a commercial disappointment. Capcom needed a hit, something bold enough to revive the franchise, but familiar enough to please fans. What they created wasn't just a new game, it was a revolution. Resident Evil 4's opening village fight wasn't just a level. It was a declaration of war on the genre's stale conventions, war on player complacency, but to understand why this 7-minute sequence shocked the world, we need to rewind to its turbulent development. Resident Evil 4 spent 5 years in development hell. Early versions bore little resemblance to the final product. One prototype, dubbed Hookman, starred a paranormal-obsessed Leon investigating a haunted castle. Director Shinji Mikami scrapped them all. He wanted players to feel hunted, not just scared, to make every bullet matter. Survival horror had become predictable. Mikami needed to break that formula, give players freedom, but take away their safety. The result was a game that threw out the rulebook. Fixed cameras? Gone. Tank controls replaced with laser sight aiming. While movement retained some tank-like stiffness, the over-the-shoulder camera modernized combat, letting players aim and shoot with precision. And zombies were reborn as the Ganados, villagers infected by a mind-controlling parasite, capable of coordination, strategy, and rage. Before RE4, survival horror was a genre of limitations. Fixed camera angles framed scares like a horror movie director, but they also trapped players in passive roles. Tank controls, where pushing up always moved your character forward regardless of camera perspective, added tension but sacrificed fluidity. These were games about managing resources, solving puzzles, and surviving scripted encounters. Enemies were obstacles, not hunters. Even the biggest genre favorites like Silent Hill 2 prioritized symbolism over systemic terror. Enemies reflected the protagonist's psyche, not his survival instincts. You fought guilt, trauma, and regret, but rarely felt outmatched. Meanwhile, action games were surging. Titles like Devil May Cry rewarded players for flair, speed, and aggression. Capcom saw an opportunity. What if survival horror could borrow that adrenaline without losing its teeth? Resident Evil 4's village fight begins with a lie. Leon arrives in a quiet, sun-drenched hamlet. A lone villager chops wood. Ignoring him, it's eerie but peaceful until the first act swings.
Freeze! I said freeze!
Within seconds, the game establishes its new language of terror. The Ganados don't shamble, they sprint, they flank, they break through doors and hurl dynamite. The camera, now glued to Leon's shoulder, turns every corner into a blind spot. And then you arrive to the village, and just moments later, there's him.
Vayan por detrás. Who are these people? What are they planning? Chainsaw. Shit.
Dr. Salvador, the chainsaw-wielding nightmare, isn't just an enemy, he's a punctuation mark. His instant kill mechanic teaches players the new rules. Stand still, and you die. Fight fair, and you die. Resident Evil was no longer about survival, it was about adaptation. Resident Evil 4 didn't just impress, it redefined survival horror itself. Critics hailed it as the single greatest horror-themed action game ever created, praising its relentlessly exciting white-knuckle action and inspired state-of-the-art cinematic presentation. They declared it true survival horror, a bold reinvention of the series that takes the genre in a new direction. By replacing slow-paced tension with frantic, heart-pounding urgency. Players didn't need reviews to tell them though. The moment Dr. Salvador's chainsaw roared in the village, they knew this was something special. And then, as suddenly as it began, it's over. The church bell rings, enemies retreat, you're left standing in the silence, heart pounding, hand shaking. You didn't win, you endured, and gaming would never be the same.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
But how did a 7-ish minute fight become one of gaming's most copied sequences. Let's dissect the clockwork chaos of the village and why its AI still terrifies us. Resident Evil 4's village fight isn't chaos, it's choreography. Every scream, every shattered door, every bullet is part of a meticulously designed dance. Before the first enemy appears, the village fight teaches you to fear silence. No music, no stingers, just the creak of rusty hinges and the rasp of Leon's breath. This is impressive sound design at its most relentless, a technique later borrowed by games like Dead Space, where the only soundtrack is the clatter of necromorph claws on metal. When the chaos begins, sound becomes a weapon. Ganados shout in garbled Spanish. Their voices mashed together into a chaotic mess of pure dread. But the true maestro of terror is Dr. Salvador's chainsaw. Its roar isn't just noise, it's a heartbeat. The closer he gets, the louder it pounds, until the screen shakes with every rev. Pre-2005, enemies in horror games were obstacles. The Ganados, they're predators. They act with a pack mentality. Groups will split up to surround Leon, some charge head-on, while others loop behind barns. Then there's Dr. Salvador, the king of destroying barricades and herding players into the open. He's not just an enemy, he's the director, reshaping the battlefield to amplify panic. Capcom's programmers used advanced pathfinding for 2005. Ganados calculate the fastest route to Leon, even mid-chase. Climb the tower, they throw Molotov cocktails. Hide in the house, they break windows. This isn't AI, it's persistence. The village seems open, but it's a maze of manipulation. New players panic, veterans strategize, but both are funneled into the same brutal lessons. Speedrunners grenades skip the fight in seconds, new players cower for minutes, yet both experiences feel organic. How? The village is a reactive playground. Camp too long, enemies hurl dynamite. Waste ammo, a grenade spawns in a nearby barrel. Capcom's invisible hand ensures you're never safe and never stuck. This is resource puppeteering. The game tracks your ammo, health, and position, dynamically adjusting drops to keep you on the knife's edge. It's not cheating, it's compassionate cruelty. You don't beat the village fight, you survive it. Whether you kill 15 enemies or 40, you must wait for the church bell to ring. This illusion of infinite enemies was a masterstroke. Players felt relieved, not cheated, because the fight earned their panic. The developers wanted players to think that they barely made it, not that they won. Every modern horror game owes this sequence a debt. The Last of Us refined its combat chess, Dead Space weaponized its claustrophobia, even games like God of War adopted its arena design. But how did this village sequence infect an entire industry? In 2014, Shinji Mikami returned to horror with The Evil Within, a game that feels less like a successor and more like a remix of RE4's greatest hits. The opening hours trap protagonist Sebastian Castellanos in a battered village under siege by the Sadists, a chainsaw-wielding butcher who's less Dr. Salvador and more his deranged cousin. Mikami doubled down on everything that made RE4's village fight iconic. Verticality is more intense, with enemies swarming rooftops and ladders, leaving no safe spot. Stealth adds a layer of tension. You can crouch to avoid detection, but risk being cornered. Resources are scarcer, forcing every shot to count, and enemy AI is more aggressive, flanking and surrounding you. The sadist looms as a constant, instant death threat. While environmental traps and burning bodies become essential survival tools, all of this, combined with oppressive lighting, sound design, and unrelenting pressure, turns the encounter into pure, suffocating panic. The Evil Within's village isn't a homage, it's a challenge. Naughty Dog's The Last of Us is often praised for its storytelling, but its combat is pure RE4. In the Billstown sequence, they face infected that flank, communicate, and adapt to player tactics. It's survival horror repackaged as a narrative. The DNA is everywhere. Every bullet matters, forcing agonizing choices. Like the village, some battles are about endurance, not victory.
And we told him, like, you know, the chainsaw guy from Resident Evil 4, that's basically our clicker.
Yes.
It's the chainsaw guy from Resident Evil 4. Like, we tell him everything we ripped him off of his game.
Dead Space may take place in space, but its scares are rooted in Resident Evil 4's rural Spain. Tight corridors, unpredictable enemies, and overwhelming dread. The necromorph's strategic dismemberment mechanic, shooting limbs to slow enemies, is a direct descendant of RE4's locational damage. Even enemy designs share bloodlines. The Twitcher, a necromorph with jerky, erratic movements, mirrors Dr. Salvador's unpredictable aggression. Both exist to punish players who camp or hesitate. RE4 showed developers that horror could be action-packed without losing its soul. Even non-horror games adopted RE4's trick. The troll fights in God of War trap players in cramped arenas, echoing RE4's claustrophobia, dodge too late, and you're crushed. These moments aren't horror, but they are haunted by RE4's DNA. The village fight taught developers that panic isn't a genre, it's a tool. In 2021, Capcom paid tribute to their own legacy. Resident Evil Village's opening Lycan Siege is a near shot-for-shot remake of the Village fight. Ethan Winters replaces Leon, werewolves replace Ganados, but the rhythm is identical. Time, survival, and environmental interactions mimic the likes of Resident Evil 4's Village sequence. The Hammerman stalks you like Dr. Salvador. It's proof that RE4's formula is still the genre's beating heart. In 2023, Capcom remade RE4 with ruthless fidelity. The Village fight returned, but with a twist. The Ganados had evolved. They fake attacks to bait parries, Dr. Salvador smashes through walls, environments crumble in real time, yet the soul remains. Panic thrives on player agency. The parry system represents this. Players can now deflect attacks with timed knife swings, a skill-based mechanic that rewards mastery. But Capcom balanced it ruthlessly. Miss a parry and you lose durability. Run out of knives and you're back to square one. It's RE4's original philosophy. Give power, but never control. Polished for a new era. For speedrunners, the Village fight is a puzzle. Players try to abuse every quirk, utilizing grenades and pixel-perfect pathing. These feats highlight even further on the sequence's genius. Casual players see chaos, speedrunners see code, but both prove the same point. The Village fight is a playground. Whether you're hiding in a closet or yeeting grenades like a pro, the game meets you where you are. 20 years later, that village stands, a monument to panic, precision, and the moment survival horror learned to run. It's in the DNA of every game that dares to ask, can you survive? Resident Evil 4 didn't just change survival horror. It gave us a language for fear. And as long as games exist, we'll return to that village, not to conquer it, not to master it, but to remember what it feels like to fight.